Hey everyone, welcome to the open question. Fear is the fuel that keeps religion alive. Without it, the entire system collapses. Every holy text, every sermon, every ritual that promises salvation or threatens punishment depends on your willingness to be afraid of something you cannot see. Fear is the invisible leash that keeps billions obedient, afraid to question, afraid to think, afraid to step outside the boundary drawn by people who claim to speak for the divine. From the moment you're told about eternal torment, divine judgment, or cosmic surveillance, fear becomes the silent background noise of faith. It shapes your behavior, not through understanding, but through intimidation. The promise of heaven means nothing without the threat of hell. And that's by design. No religion thrives on love alone. It thrives on control, and fear is control perfected. When a child is told that questioning is sinful, the seed of fear takes root before curiosity has a chance to grow. They're not learning truth, they're learning submission. The message is clear. Obedience brings safety, disobedience brings disaster. And that conditioning follows them into adulthood, where fear becomes mistaken for faith. Throughout history, fear has been religion's most powerful marketing tool. Fear of death made people accept promises of afterlives that no one has ever seen. Fear of drought made tribes offer sacrifices to gods of thunder. Fear of disease turned prayer into medicine and miracles into explanations. Every unknown became an opportunity for religion to step in and say, "Don't worry, we'll protect you, if you just believe." But that protection always came at a price. You had to surrender your reason, your freedom, your individuality. You had to accept guilt for simply being human. Religion tells you that you were born flawed, born sinful, born deserving of punishment. Then it offers you forgiveness, but only through obedience to the same system that made you feel broken in the first place. It's a psychological trap. First they wound you, then they sell you the cure. Fear turns morality into obedience, and obedience into virtue. Instead of thinking about right and wrong, people think about reward and punishment. Good deeds aren't done out of empathy or understanding, but out of fear of cosmic retribution. The question isn't, what is right, but what will happen to me if I don't do what I'm told? When fear replaces conscience, morality loses its meaning. This is why religions depend on threats of damnation, curses, karma, or divine wrath. Remove those threats, and suddenly the believer must stand on reason alone, and reason doesn't need a God to know compassion. Fear blinds people from realizing that morality existed long before religion. Humans evolved empathy, cooperation, and justice because those qualities helped us survive as a species, not because a deity demanded it. Religions know this, but they can't afford to admit it. If people stopped fearing punishment, temples would empty, donations would stop, and the hierarchy built on fear would crumble. So they keep the fear alive, disguised as reverence. They tell you to fear God as a form of respect, but fear and respect are not the same. You can respect wisdom, respect life, respect truth. But fear only breeds dependence and silence. Look at the architecture of belief systems. The priest, the imam, the monk, they all hold power not because they know more, but because they convince others that they have access to something terrifying and untouchable. They claim to stand between you and divine wrath, turning themselves into gatekeepers of salvation. You obey not because their words make sense, but because the alternative sounds terrifying. Every major religion has used fear to sustain its authority. The church once sold indulgences, spiritual receipts that supposedly spared souls from hellfire. Entire societies bowed to the fear of excommunication, believing that a word from a priest could doom them for eternity. In some cultures, natural disasters were blamed on disbelief, heresy, or women stepping out of line. Fear wasn't just emotional, it was political. It kept kings crowned, wars justified, and questions silenced. Even today, the same strategy remains. Modern believers are told that natural tragedies are divine tests, that illness is punishment, that disbelief is rebellion. The language changes, but the mechanism doesn't. Fear turns people into instruments of their own oppression. It convinces them that suffering is sacred, that pain is noble, that silence is faith. But here's the paradox. Fear doesn't prove truth. It only proves power. The more an idea relies on threats to survive, the weaker that idea actually is. If something is true, it doesn't need to scare you into believing it. Gravity doesn't demand worship. Evolution doesn't threaten you with eternal pain if you question it. Truth stands on its own. It doesn't need fear as a crutch. Religion's survival depends on convincing you that letting go of it will destroy you, that without it, you'll be lost, immoral, or cursed. But that fear is the final illusion, the last defense of a system terrified of its own fragility. Because once a person stops being afraid, the spell breaks. The rituals lose their magic, the threats lose their power, and the idea of divine punishment starts to sound like what it's always been, a human invention to keep other humans in line. Fear built the walls of every temple and church, but curiosity and courage are what tear them down. When you start to ask, "Why am I afraid?" you begin to see who benefits from that fear. And it's never you. The moment you replace fear with understanding, the entire structure starts to collapse under its own contradictions. Religion needs your fear because without it, it has nothing left to offer. It needs you to tremble at death so you'll beg for heaven. It needs you to feel guilt so you'll ask for forgiveness. It needs you to stay small so it can stay powerful. But the truth doesn't need fear. It invites questions. It thrives on discovery. It grows with courage. The most dangerous thing you can do to religion is stop being afraid. Because the moment you do, it loses its grip. You no longer need intermediaries between you and existence. You no longer need invisible threats to be a good person. You no longer need to worship what you can understand through reason and empathy. Fear is the lock, and questioning is the key. Once you turn it, you realize there was never a monster waiting outside, only the echo of human imagination, dressed in divine authority. And when that echo fades, what remains isn't fear, but freedom.